Hey, how's it going?
Hi, good. How are you today?
I'm good.
Uh,
Just waiting to see if other people join.
Hello,
Hello.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Oh.
both are not having audio problems. It's a miracle.
For now.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, Tesh.
Hello, good morning. And good evening for Jay.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening. Is there someone in Europe on the call right now?
Yeah, I'm traveling home to India, so
Ah,
yeah.
right on.
So it's
Are you in India or are you on like a layover to India?
no, I'm in India, so it's like 10:30 right now.
Oof. Well, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Rita won't be able to make it today. She's trapped.
Getting my trees trimmed. There's a they're gonna replace a power pole soon, and they need to get the branches away from I don't know the wires, the poles, both.
It's not
So
because of the rains and the like storm and stuff.
no, they're literally gonna like replace the power pole, just because it's like old. Um, and so if I get called away, that's probably why.
All good.
What is power?
Like those tall wooden things that support the power lines
Ah,
have that little T at the top.
I had one agenda item. Anybody else have anything else?
uh no. not,
Okay.
not, uh I'm a bit
I
out
think
of it.
before the target handler refresh for the revisiting, we probably need Rita if you want to revisit that one. But I think last time we had a like some sort of consensus, I guess.
Yeah, it seemed like people were like for it notionally, but were like,
Yeah.
hey, this is like a lot of work.
Yeah, and also like
So
if we don't want to break the existing user experience or make it worse, which I think that was Rita's point, which I agree,
yeah.
or
Which
make it
I
like too complicated.
um,
or
I
or make
still,
it oh good.
yeah, I haven't gotten through the recording. Can you like, if you guys remember, can you provide TLDR
I think it's in
of the
the
discussion?
doc, and then look, you can look at the Rita's question. I think it's there's a migration process, obviously, and then it makes the like I think Rita's point was like let's think about the migration process and then just like how would folks that are using the constraint templates and constraints today migrate to the new sort of schema and then all that stuff and then have a good experience.
Yeah, it's certainly like backwards compatible, but I remember you guys wondering about maybe there's like migration tools that could
Yeah.
streamline if someone wanted to migrate like a constraint template moved
Mhm.
from one flavor to another, how would the constraint consumer do that? I don't know if if you guys were as concerned about the constraint template authoring experience or not. Like that would just be adding a field and upping the version is sort of the minimal change there.
Yeah, I think though that was fine if you're like net new sort of stuff, but it is for like the existing things. I think that maybe the net new stuff, the only thing is like the complexity.
Right, but that complexity actually already exists. Like it will show its head.
Yeah, if in the future, like for the other, once we want to like expand it, I do get your point. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and even if we weren't, like now that we need to be aware, like if we add matching request verb, right? Then that complexity is already there in terms of things users need to be aware of. We're just surfacing it in the API. So from my point of view, it's actually easier because there's something warning users, hey, you should be aware of this. Whereas right now it would kind of be a gotcha, right? Anyway.
And I guess the other thing, Jay, besides I think your work on the multi-enforcement action enforcement points, it's a mouthful, is a prerequisite for this one.
Yeah, and for fully supporting VAP, right?
Yeah.
Like I think the central thesis, the like why I wrote that was mostly like, oh, I see this thing VAP needs to support like delete, right? And so in that doc, there's a sequencing where the crazier stuff I was asking for is like dead last, but it's like in order to support VAP delete, your stuff, JDIP, the multi-target, is it target? No, multi-enforcement point enforcement action needs to be in place before we can add matchers that would support things like only, do this for delete, because until your stuff is written, there's no way to say, hey, this matcher is invalid anywhere but for a webhook, so only enforce this constraint on a webhook. So you'd wind up just like having fatal errors enforcing constraints for audit, for instance, and no way for users to remediate. So yeah, it's salient.
Well, on that front,
oh, sorry,
I just raised the PR for frameworks implementing the changes for multi EP. I still have to kind of go through refactor and adding some more test cases, but meanwhile it's ready for review if you guys have a chance to look at it.
Okay, when did that get when did you put it up?
The PR?
Yeah.
Just like half an hour ago, I guess.
Oh, okay. I was like, oh,
yeah,
did
yeah,
I miss a thing? Okay.
No.
I'll add that to the agenda. Cool. Anything else on this topic? Do you want to talk about the policy library for WAP?
Yeah, let's do.
Yeah, I think we briefly discussed this before, like how we want to handle like the migration and then like how do we want to surface the WAP policies. I think what we discussed in the past was have both Rego and WAP in the same file, and then depending on if Gatekeeper supports Rego, it'll pick up Rego, so it will be backwards compatible. And then if it supports WAP, I think we prioritize WAP if I remember correctly. So it will just pick up the WAP, even though the ordering might be like Rego first, WAP second, or whatever.
there's maybe an open question of, do we want the preference to be user configurable? Either or, it just depends on how you initiate the constraint framework code-wise. So you could add a flag allowing overriding of priority.
Yeah.
Might be useful if you know, there's some kind of error in the migration or error in, like, I don't know, the cell engine. But it would only probably be useful for a somewhat limited time, right? Because that's going to be a very rough knob, right? Like it's going to transition the preference for all constraint templates, right? So it's probably not a way to fix a problem with an individual constraint.
Don't we already have this? We use WAP, the label.
Oh, that's right.
It's even on a more like fine-grained level per policy.
Yeah, maybe I'm jumping the gun. Like I was assuming that defaulted to on the enable VAP, but
yeah, I think it's gatekeeper default now. Oh, you're right. Sorry, you have your hand up?
Oh yeah, so I have a question. I think you guys want to use the VAP, but I searched the VAP, but it is the better version in the Kubernetes 1.28, right?
So right now it is in in 130 it's going to be GA. It's going to be stable, so it's going to be enabled by default. But I think starting with 127 or 128, it has been beta for a while.
Okay, so because this is very important because we are supporting right now. So in the OpenShift, we are supporting 2.28, 1.28. So okay, thanks.
So for that one, you would need to enable the beta API. And there's also a future flag. So if you want to use WAP, then you would do those things, and then you can have Gatekeeper, which is on the main branch of Gatekeeper, create the WAP resources.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we don't have a release version with the WAP yet. Oh, go ahead, Max.
Yeah, I think there also, just to get a bit more clarity, there's kind of two ways you can use VAP in Gatekeeper. There's a way where you can write constraint templates in VAP cell, right? And then Gatekeeper will be able to evaluate those templates and constraints as both the admission webhook and as audit. That you just need Gatekeeper at the appropriate version for, and that's independent of the cluster version, right? Yeah, whether VOP is available or not, irrelevant. But there's a second mode where if you want, instead of webhook enforcement, you want VAP itself to do the enforcement, right? So instead of calling out to the webhook, VAP is evaluated inside the API server. The way we do that is we'll read your constraints and templates and generate the appropriate validating admission policy resources. And that will be affected by Kubernetes version.
So another question is that this is not going to be replaced Rego, right?
It'll exist beside it.
Oh, so actually user can use the VAP, so not the Rego, right? This is another choice of replace instead of the Rego, right? The user can use the cell language, right?
Yeah, and it's just, so if all you're doing is writing constraints and you're relying on the constraint template author to handle the language, you mostly don't need to worry about it. You just need to worry about, like, does my Gatekeeper version support the template that I'm using, right? So if you're like in an old version of Gatekeeper that only knows Rego, then you won't be able to use a VAP template. But if you're new enough such that it's supported, then the constraint doesn't care what language the template's written in. And if you have some like templates that you're using or that you've written, some are in Rego, some are written in VAP, that doesn't matter, right? It's not like a switch, like a hard switch. You can continue to mix and match. And then
And
there's
that's what we were talking earlier with the library supporting both of them.
That is really awesome. Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And yeah, for if your template author, like you can mix and match, like, oh, template for labels is on VAP and template for pods is on Rego, and that doesn't matter. And if you have if you're a template author and you're worried about backwards compatibility, and this is, I think, where we're getting to with the future of the library, you can keep templates written, a single template like K8s required labels, for instance, that can have source code in both Rego and in VAP type code. And there's I forget which Gatekeeper we released this on, but we changed how templates are read such that we can keep both source codes in the same template. And if you're on an older version that doesn't recognize VAP, it'll just read the Rego instead. So template authors can move forward without worrying about breaking current users of Gatekeeper.
That actually brings me a good point. Should we release a beta version and then have like this description and people can try it? Because I think we have all the pieces now, right?
A beta version of
The
so I think for me the salient question about promoting to beta is the schema for the engine, right? The cell driver and engine. Because once we move to beta, I want to make sure that the backwards compatibility guarantees we can honor them as much.
Oh no,
as
I mean
possible.
the beta of the Gatekeeper itself, not the future of the beta.
Beta of Gatekeeper
So
itself.
3.6 beta 1 or something like that.
So that we
today,
can,
unless somebody like builds this from the main branch, they cannot try it.
oh, did we not cut a release?
I don't think so. I mean, Rita's PR just got merged, so
oh yeah, then
yeah, let's do that one. I think it'll be yeah, let's do release 3.6 beta 1. Okay, I can do that today.
Cool.
And then we can add like a little bit note so people can hopefully try it. Yeah.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, did that answer your question?
Oh yeah, that is really cool. Actually, a lot of some customers complain about the Lego.
Yeah, that's usually the top concern.
Yeah, so honestly, some customer want to keep Evernote because of Lego. Yeah, I think this is really cool. Maybe I should tell my project manager. He's gonna be really happy.
Nice.
Awesome. Yay.
Thanks.
Yeah, we could talk about too. I don't mean to like change the topic, but there was a issue filed around like supporting referential in Cell. We could like talk about, but let's finish the library stuff.
Oh yeah. Anything else that we want to do for the library? So we talked about the Rego and WAP side by side. Do you remember which version Gatekeeper supports that, Max? Or like I can search for it?
Which version Gatekeeper supports?
Supports like defining multiple constraints, and then Gatekeeper will pick whatever.
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Do you remember like the PR or something?
I can find it. I
Okay.
could chat the PR like after
cool.
the meeting. I need to go
Yeah.
hunting.
Yeah,
But-
we can follow up.
It's been months though, so there should have been at least one release. Like gosh, maybe like half a year.
Oh, okay. You said months, and I was like, because our release cadence is like 3 months. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, so to put it into perspective, that was like a prerequisite for adding a cell engine, like at
Mhm.
all. And the cell engine's kind of been in, not limbo, but beta for. I don't even think VAP was in beta when we first wrote the engine. I think VAP was still in alpha, and that's been a minute.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Anything else we can think about the policy migration? I saw the policy library migration.
Did we want configurable priority?
I think it's use WAP. I don't think we need it because that's more like granular. Seems like.
Okay, yeah, let's put that we decide
Oh,
next.
yeah. Okay. Sorry. Use
And yeah, the where I maybe could see it being useful is like putting some hint on the constraint template, but I would say we can like cross that bridge when we come to it. Like if for some reasons an individual template had a bug and you wanted to like put a preference for a language on that template, but you could also just delete the language you don't like. So it's there's workarounds if that's friction for people. What else would be interesting? Conformance rules, right? Using Gator. I think Gator CLI kind of becomes the preferred way to unit test. Because like we can't run the Rego unit tests against cell code.
That's right. So updating the CI to run with Gator with cell expressions.
Right. Oh yeah. Gator needs to learn cell for sure. It may already. I think it already does, but you need a flag. And then also just making sure that if/when we rewrite a template to use cell, that we have those conformance tests in like a Gator suite.
And then you when you mean the conformance test is the Gator suite tests, right?
Yeah, and also the like the Rego unit tests. Like ideally, those would be rewritten to use suites if possible, because or where it makes sense. Like there may be times when you're testing some internal function that you would only use in Rego and not use in Cell, and that wouldn't make sense. But basically the concern would be, okay, I've rewritten this, used to be in Rego, now it's going to also be in Cell. I want to make sure it behaves the same in both languages, right? That would be my concern.
So today we have the Rego policies and then the tests. Can we do a similar thing with Cell? Does that exist, or do we solely rely on Gator?
I would just rely on Gator moving forward, right? Like let's pretend that 5 years from now there's some other language that becomes popular, or that we need, like having everything in suites, then we never need to have this conversation again, right? Like the tests are essentially language neutral at that point, and they're more like integration tests. It could still make sense to have unit tests for like internal functions, but anything that's like I expect to see this bad state detected and I expect to see this good state allowed, that should be in a suite.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So this is going to be a little different than the how we test Rego, though. So we test Rego, we have like the Rego and then the unit tests, and then we copy that and then into a constraint template, and then we tab that template it out. So we copy the Rego. So when we want to change something, we change the Rego in the Rego file, and it automatically gets reflected into the CTs and stuff.
Yeah, I mean that is a good question though. How do you curry the raw language?
Yeah.
in the
Do we want to
library?
do a similar thing, like a raw thing is in a file, like say, I don't know, my policy.cell or something, and then users change that, but then it's kind of moot if you can't really run anything on it, like standalone.
Can't really run anything standalone.
Yeah, so like
Oh,
the OPA test equivalent of that. Is
well,
there like a cell test or something like that?
not that I'm aware of, and it certainly like because VAP is a very specific flavor of cell, right? Like VAP is the only thing that has like object, old object,
I
what
see.
have you.
Okay.
Um,
So that wouldn't even work because it's specific to Kubernetes.
Yeah. I do like or this sort of like conceptual separation our current library model has. It's kind of like the template is the header file, to borrow from like C, and then the code is separate. So you can kind of think about the interface of the constraint versus the source code itself. There's room for putting unit tests if there's still some use for them. Like I said, helper functions are a good use case for non-suite tests. And then you basically suite tests become your conformance tests. So yeah, the flow will need to be updated to handle multiple languages. Hopefully that's not too onerous.
Yeah, we have to think about a way, yeah, because it's right now it's very Rego specific in like the one that I mentioned, yeah.
Like, and do the cell and the Rego live in the same directory? Like, there's nothing preventing that.
Yeah. I mean, we could do the same flow, like the cell is a file, right? User just edit the file, and then we copy both the Rego and the cell inside the Gator, and then we test that Gator like we do today.
Yeah. I mean, there's another, and this might be orthogonal, but we also don't handle libs very well for Rego. Like, we're just manually copy pasting. I don't think this touches the same code paths, but if it's like right there, that's a improvement we could make. But I think that's a completely different like config surface area to touch, so probably not.
Do we think it's worth to create something like a Rego to cell migrator, or is that even possible?
I don't think it's possible. Like I do believe there's some stuff that is currently not expressible via cell. My canonical example of that would normally be the canonicalization of like CPU and RAM, right? Going from like kilobytes to bytes or whatever. But they did add a special function to cell. Kubernetes did to handle unit conversion there. So if you just take like the raw language, things are not translatable. You can always like add stuff, but I think that also like I don't know how you'd fan out like a list comprehension in Rego to cell, or because cell only accepts a single statement, and Rego you can have multiple violation rules. Like, how do you okay, so VAP you can have multiple tests, right? So because VAP is like actually a bunch of cell stitched together rather than an individual cell. statement. Anyway, you nerd sniped me a bit. I wouldn't trust there'd be a reliable way to recast Rego as cell that didn't make some very brittle assumptions.
Okay. So anything else we can think about for the library migration?
I think versioning, it's a non-breaking change, so that's good.
Yeah, yeah. And then the same thing will apply, I guess. Oh, that's a good point. Say that there's a version 2 of a policy. Do we add cell to version 1 or just version 2?
I'm fine just adding it to version 2.
Yeah,
right?
that also makes sense.
Yeah. I think there's also a question of, for however long we have a policy written in dual languages, there's an expectation that any change will be like twice as hard, right? Update the cell, update the rego. So I think we definitely want that complexity short term, just so that users don't need to be aware, right? Like they aren't forced to upgrade Gatekeeper to upgrade their constraint templates. But or vice versa, really.
Yeah.
But
You're saying that if Rego changes, say it bumps a version, we automatically, I mean, the cell is bundled with it, so they automatically get bundled together, even though cell didn't change. Is that what you're saying?
So what I'm saying is, like, let's say we need to do something around exempting sidecars, right? Like, let's pretend that whole exempt images or whatever it was called didn't exist, right? And so we added that to a constraint template that was written in cell and Rego. We can't just add it to the cell only, and we can't add it to the Rego only. It needs to be added to both, right? So that both users, because the constraint is meant to behave the same either way.
Yeah, I agree. Otherwise it would be very confusing if the Rego had exempt functionality but cell didn't. So say if somebody is creating a new PR, then we would ask them to add to the cell also as a PR gate.
Right. But I also don't think we necessarily want to absorb that complexity indefinitely, right? There's like some reasonable time frame that I would expect users to eventually upgrade Gatekeeper to the point where we can assume cell is supported, right? And at that point, being able to phase out Rego would be nice. That would be a breaking change, right? We would need to update the version, the major version of a template. But like, the alternative is to always be stuck implementing both cell and Rego. And maybe a related question is, if we add a new template in that interim period, should it have both languages? Or do we just say, well, no, all new things, like, it's new, so you're not broken, but you do need to upgrade to adopt it?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a future conversation. Yeah, but it's yeah, definitely like a weird area. Yeah. But for now, we can just say Rego and cell must be in parity for like a PR. And then in the future, we can say, okay, this can be cell only or something like that.
Yeah, to be anal, I would say PR for existing constraint templates.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Because
but the new ones, do we think that it can start with cell only?
I'm split, right? I think I'm more sensitive like earlier on in the rollout process, where like, hey, there's not that many versions of Gatekeeper out there that support cell, right? That users, it would become a barrier to adopting that template, at the very least.
Right.
It's not breaking current users, so I think it's a valid stance to take. And I think that eventually it doesn't make sense to always double implement. So I'm on the fence for that like interim period of, I don't know, 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, so I'll just put in new policies. Oh, we need to have code finish for a TBD period. So then we can discuss that later on.
There's probably documentation stuff we could do here too, like just I don't know if we want to have like a permanent flag or something on the website, but if we had like I'm imagining like a little like blue or red rectangle like supports Rego, supports Sal or something like that all constraint templates could have that sort of make it easy for people
Right, like
to
a website sort of thing. Yeah, update website to indicate supports. So yeah.
It
Also-
actually that will stay relevant for VAP generation, right? Because anything basically you would need supports. So there's also a linguistic trap I just fell into. Like I kind of don't want to conflate cell with VAP cell. Because for instance, if we want to support referential constraint templates written in cell, that's not going to be VAP cell because VAP likely will never support referential. So that would need to be like a different flavor of cell. Might look similar, but it will have like language features VAP doesn't support.
How can we use that?
How can we do that?
Yeah, like will it be gatekeeper specific functionality then?
Yes. Yeah.
So like how we did with external data.
Right. Yeah. Basic. Almost exactly. I have thoughts on this. That's why I was like, oh, we could talk about this as the next topic. Because it did come up as an issue recently. But yeah, are you interested?
Like a special case to handling it.
Was that?
Sort of special case to handling it, like an external data, until Kubernetes ever goes that route. Then we can deprecate it if that happens.
Yeah. I mean, I would just honestly, I think I don't. Okay, so thinking about our relative investment in languages is like kind of tricky, right? Because I kind of view us as more an abstraction around languages that helps to like make it so that users need to think less about like Rego versus Cell versus whatever. Not none, right? Because there's like platform capabilities, right? Like can use VAP, right? But less, and has some guidance around how you can think about it, and maybe makes it more clear. Some very simple signals you can know what to do without knowing the contents of things. That being said, it's not that we have zero interest in language, clearly, right? Because as you're pointing out, there's some friction around just supporting Rego that users don't necessarily want to write in Rego, right? But if we just use cell as is, right, for VAP, then you can't support referential, right? So then there's some gap, and that's either filled by bringing in some other language wholesale, right, or fix or adding a new flavor of cell, right? So that has this functionality. So I think we're kind of in a spot where we have to be like a little bit invested in language, right? And like if we make that leap, backwards compatibility applies, right? Like we're not gonna like add a feature to users and then take it away. And actually, honestly, there's other things like external data, maybe like generation. I don't know, like what could Gatekeeper do that Kubernetes either like will not do out of principle, right? Which is going to be associated with webhooks and referential data, that kind of stuff. Or maybe they just didn't think about doing.
And also
Right.
it's integrated closely, say like the referential would be integrated with sync sets, for example, right? So that makes the experience like more customized for a gatekeeper. Similar to external data, right? Like OPA does support HTTP send, but external data is specific to gatekeeper and it has its own like CRDs and whatnot.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, constraint framework versus gatekeeper is also an interesting. Like, I would argue that expansion templates could be folded into some of these new primitives I was advocating for last week. Like, it's a kind of transformation that should be supported at the framework level, because I see no difference between transforming a deployment to a pod or transferring like a Terraform deployment object into a K8s deployment object, right? They seem kind of like similar problems, just with maybe a difference in how do you configure that expansion. Anyway, so I got a little bit distracted, but yeah, it is supporting external data be an interesting one. We could think about audit and shift left, right? There might be things that we can do there that admission cannot do. Something worth thinking about.
Do you think we can do external data in cell too with this new thing?
Oh yeah. So I mean, not
Previously we said you can't do that one in cell. That's
you
right.
cannot do that in VAP, but
I see.
cell, right, is just a syntax for an
Right.
expression language, and we
Got
can add whatever built-in functions we want to if
Right.
we're willing to write our own flavor of cell that's not VAP.
That's gonna be very confusing.
What's that? Talking about cell, you mean, or what?
Yeah, because like hey, there's the VAP cell, and then we are our own cell that you can use these ones, but not these other things, and that
Yeah, that's why I kind of want to avoid talking about cell as a monolith.
yeah.
It's more like JSON in my mind, right? Like there's or YAML, right? There's K8s YAML and there's not K8s YAML, and
Right.
people aren't actually confused by that, but mostly because YAML has a long history of being like this very limited thing.
Yeah,
Right?
I think expectations are different, right? Because when people think about cell, they think about the Kubernetes like VAP cell.
Kind of, maybe. Like I think we are heading down a bad path based on how we talk about it, and we need to be careful.
Right.
Because even Kubernetes, there's multiple flavors, right? There's the CRD validation stuff versus the validating admission policy stuff, right? So if we train people to think of cell as this one size fits all thing that has no specialization built on top of it, then we will have done that, and then it will be confusing, right? If we train them to be like, nah, cell is like this thing that's kind of like, it has this general syntax like C, but you could bring your own libraries and something.
Yeah. What would be a good thing to call like VAP cell for like if we're specific to the VAP one?
I tend to do that. I don't know if that's necessarily the best way, but it's in my mind better than just saying cell. We actually call our engine K8s native, I think is what you would suggest.
Yeah,
right?
K8s native validation. Yeah.
Yeah. So that doesn't say cell at all, which I think is helpful in terms of maintaining the separation.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So we can just keep saying that. Okay.
Yeah. And it's mostly important for docs, right? Like we can kind of understand when we're talking amongst each other. We just need to make sure our jargon or our non-specificity of language doesn't get exported.
Yeah. I'm clarifying it in
Like, so I had thoughts around how we would support referential with Rego. I put some of the highlights in the issue, but I would like to replace Rego's cache wholesale. That would get us out of this iterable cached problem, like where every time we update sync sets, we need to wipe the cache.
right.
If we have something that's more like a key value store, right? Ideally with filtered retrievals and indexing, then we can prune the cache over time. Wiping is no longer necessary. We could support better retrieval syntax, right? Rather than like giving users this path, like data.inventory.cluster or namespace, blah, 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 blah. If we provided like a cache.retrieve function or whatever, and they passed some like retrieval criteria, right? Like kind, namespace, name, or something like that, or all pods with labels foo. The experience of writing a policy would be better. And also, if this like pretend custom cache that we wrote satisfied Rego's expectation for a data store interface, because Rego does use an interface for that, we can avoid dual caching data, which would be very expensive memory-wise. Like I think we've seen, right, like cache all pods in the cluster, oops, out of RAM, right?
Yeah.
You get there twice as fast with 2 caches. So this would be a way of avoiding that, and also set us up in the future if there's other languages that want to integrate. We can say, well, cool, and if you want access to data, here's this cache object.
Mhm.
And we can work on integrating it there. And then referential data stops being tightly coupled to language.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, it was a thing I was looking at, but I kind of got distracted over this last couple of months. And I don't know what the relative priority is, say, compared to the constraint framework stuff. These things are kind of in a similar vein to me. Like they're both of these are about making the platform more agnostic, right? Like adding more tools for dealing with the fact that when you build a stack on a cloud, you're stringing together a bunch of different technologies rather than like just K8s.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yura or Jay, did you have any questions? Just want to, there was a lot of information, but just want to make sure that you are okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of information. I don't have any questions right now, but I need to go through the recording of this again just to absorb everything.
Yeah, nothing about this is a blocker for anything that we're currently doing. I want to be clear. This is stuff we could do.
Oh, I think it's really good because I had a questions about the referential data, sorry, referential policy, was it? So yeah, so I think that's a really good answer to me. Thanks.
Okay. Good. So it already answered the question you were going to ask, is what you're saying?
Yeah. So yeah, when you switch to cell, I'm concerned about the referential data. So yeah.
Yeah. Currently, those would need to still be written in Rego. VAP enforcements. It is very unlikely that Kubernetes will ever support like just arbitrary referential. There's some limited amount of referential that they can support. Like I've seen tricks where you can treat arbitrary Kubernetes objects as the parameters object. And so you can get like one external object in as referential data. Namespaces are included in the cell environment, so that's a kind of referential. But like, oh, I want to see all config maps or all services when I write my policy. Maybe like you never say never. Maybe Kubernetes will change their minds, but currently, that is a hard no. is what I have heard.
I mean, things evolve. There's a MAR now, but no, map, right? The mutating, no, something. What is it? Let me see. The map, yeah. Mutating admission policy.
Mutating admission policy. Oh, like so like well, there's a is that an actual
Yeah,
cap?
it's a chat.
fill it out?
Yeah.
Did
They
it
just
get
added it. Yeah, I
Oh,
can
sorry.
link in the chat.
Yeah, I'm curious if it got
just added this a few weeks ago.
oh, so this is still being worked on. This is not.
Yeah, this is alpha. They're just adding the
It's a literal feature gate.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
man.
This is the before they work on it. This is FutureGate.
Okay, did they link to the cap?
There's a cap there too. Yeah, mutating admission policies.
I don't see the cap link in the PR.
It's there. I also just pasted in the chat. This is like fairly new. Yeah.
Oops! I saw you. Okay, that was the first chat actually.
I don't know if there's an actual cap. Let me see.
I know they were interested in it and working on it.
Oh, there's an implementation now. I did not see this one before.
I am really curious what stance they took with regard to turning Kubernetes into a Turing machine.
Yeah, I didn't realize there was an implementation. So it sounds like this is ahead than I thought. Interesting. I mean, definitely not making on the Turing.
I mean, I'm happy, I guess, that maybe Kubernetes might take over mutation.
Yeah.
Honestly, mutation is kind of like a weird one. Like it doesn't shift left real well. It's hard to like abstract it, like because mutation is so tightly coupled to the schema of the object, you can't do what we would do with policy where you could like rewrite objects like and have neutrality there. On the other hand, mutation scares me. Like it you could write something that just like rests on top of the reconciliation loop and just like creates arbitrary stuff. Like you could run Conway's Game of Life on the K8s API with the right combination of mutators. So one, I'm curious what cloud providers will do with regard to like enabling this feature at all. To like what their stance is around safety. But if they've made one, Then
Yeah, I mean, once it's GA, it will be enabled by default on the cloud providers, I guess, unless they like go explicitly out of their way and disable it.
well, that's my concern. Is like, honestly, if I was a cloud provider, I'd be like, no, right? Not unless you're running like Kubernetes yourself on my stuff, right? If I'm hosting this,
Mhm.
like how do I prevent abuse? But anyway, if they've taken a stance on this, then we have cover for whatever gatekeeper does vis-a-vis mutation, right? Like,
Yeah, I guess what we want to do if they do have this one, will we deprecate mutation, or like will we change it in a way that's like similar to like how we do with cell and rego and stuff, or
I don't know. Like, so I would need to read through
Yeah.
the contents.
I'm not familiar with this either. Yeah.
Yeah, like what? So my question would be, what would the value proposition of gatekeepers' involvement be at that point?
Right. Yeah.
Because I definitely think that if anything should be done on server, it's mutation, because mutation gets called in sequence, right? It's so latency sensitive that not making those network requests is very valuable. I would be a little bit confused what role gatekeeper as a mutation webhook would play, right? Like for VAP, right? Even if users want to use VAP, there's a possibility that they may want to shift left. They may want like to audit stuff, right? They may want like a single pane of glass for policy management, right? And it's impossible if you are interested in like referential policies or audit to just use VAP for policy, right? And so you can make arguments for needing some middleware, right? For mutation, again, like you can maybe talk about shifting mutation left. There was some talk about when we first designed mutation using like having kind of an audit process for mutation, right? Where you could like mutate existing objects. Their convergence really matters, I would say, because we would be driving that loop.
Yeah. How to make existing resources compliant, I guess, instead of relying on it.
Yeah. Which is like also very scary. Like I know things like Cloud Custodian do this, but you could kill a cluster like that, right? By making the wrong mutation, and you know it could be a very fast acting thing because we're running a tight loop on the control plane. Or would be running a tight loop on the control plane. But anyway, so there's like maybe some stuff we could think about beyond the idea of admission. But if it's just about mutating objects, like at admission time, just write the like native K8s stuff. Avoid the extra complexity of middleware, avoid webhooks, right? And maybe someone can handle, assuming it's possible, shift left of the mutation syntax just by wrapping it in the CLI. So then I think the extra value comes from this remediation stuff. If we wanted to pursue that, I'm not convinced we do. And at that point, we'll be very glad that we have this really locked down syntax for mutation. The only other kind of like wild card is Caverno exists, right? And I don't really view us as like competing with Caverno. We kind of have a different ethos. But you know, people do kind of think about us in the same space, right? And they have a stance on mutation, you know, so inevitably whatever we do will be viewed in relation to what they do, right? So coming up with some principled thoughts there would be maybe helpful if we like intentionally have a feature gap, right? Saying like, here's why. Yeah, so there's, I think, a lot of moving pieces with mutation. I'm glad it's moving forward because I've been saying like, hey, we don't want to like do too much with our current mutation stuff while we know Kubernetes is interested in doing their own thing with mutation.
Right.
And I'm glad that Kubernetes either implicitly or explicitly is going to take a stance on convergence. I'm really curious what they've said because I had pushed them to make us like any kind of stance. Like it could be we don't care and here's why, and that's fine, but like say something about it. Yeah. There's quite a few points in there and I'm about to go into a circle. But I'm curious if other people have thoughts.
I think we're on time. I have to drop.
Well, it's good to see everyone, and thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye.